Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's victim story, I know it's annoying, but I need to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel here. I'm a new and small channel on YouTube, as you can see, and a simple click on the like button can help me a lot. So please subscribe to support me, click the like button and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. Now, let's get to the case. The sun beat down on Amity Island's pristine beach, its rays glinting off the gentle waves lapping at the shore. Sarah Thompson squinted against the bright light as she stepped onto the warm sand, her toes sinking into its soft embrace. She inhaled, deeply savoring the salty tang of the ocean air. "Come on, guys, let's find a good spot before it gets too crowded," Sarah called over her shoulder, to her family trailing behind her. Her husband Mike trudged through the sand, laden with beach chairs and an oversized umbrella. Their two children, Emma, 10, and Tython, 8, darted past him, racing towards the water's edge. "Kids, wait up," Mike shouted, his voice tinged with exasperation. "We need to set up first." Sarah chuckled at the familiar chaos of their family outings. This vacation had been long overdue, a chance to escape the daily grind of their lives back in Ohio. As a nurse, Sarah had been working overtime for months, and Mike's job as an accountant had been equally demanding. They both needed this break, a chance to reconnect with each other and their children. They found an open area near the lifeguard stand and began setting up their beach camp. Sarah helped Mike plant the umbrella firmly in the sand while the kids bounced impatiently nearby. "Can see or be? We go in the water now, Mom," Emma pleaded, her eyes wide with excitement. Sarah smiled, remembering her own childhood trips to the beach. "Not yet, sweetheart. We need to put on sunscreen first. You don't want to turn into a lobster, do you?" Ethan giggled at the thought. "I want to be a crab instead." As Sarah rummaged through their beach bag for the sunscreen, she overheard a conversation between two nearby beachgoers. "Did you hear about that fisherman who spotted a big shark out past the reef last week?" A woman's voice carried on the breeze. Sarah's ears perked up, a slight frown creasing her brow. "Oh, come on," her companion scoffed. "Those guys are always telling tall tales, probably just wanted to scare the tourists." The first woman lowered her voice, but Sarah could still make out her words. "I don't know, the harbor master seemed pretty concerned, said it might be a bull shark." A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the warm day. She shook her head, trying to dispel the unease that had settled over her. They were on vacation after all. No need to let idle gossip ruin their fun. "All right, troops," Sarah announced, her voice perhaps a touch too cheerful. "Sunscreen time. Line up." The next hour passed in a blur of laughter and play. Sarah and Mike helped the kids build an elaborate sandcastle, complete with a moat and seashell decorations. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the beach grew more crowded, filled with the sounds of splashing water and cheerful conversation. "Mom, can we go swimming now?" Ethan asked, bouncing on his toes with pent-up energy. Sarah glanced at Mike, who nodded. "All right, but stay where we can see you, and don't go out too far." The children cheered and raced towards the water, their parents following at a more sedate pace. Sarah waded in up to her knees, relishing the cool relief against her sun-warmed skin. She watched as Emma and Ethan splashed each other, their joyous shrieks carrying across the water. Mike came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "This was a great idea," he murmured in her ear. "I can't remember the last time I felt this relaxed." Sarah leaned back against him, savoring the moment. "Me neither. We should do this more often." As they stood there, enjoying the gentle ebb and flow of the waves, Sarah's gaze was drawn to a group of snorkelers a little way down the beach. They seemed to be having a wonderful time, their colorful fins flashing as they explored the clear waters. A thought struck her. "Hey, didn't we—" "Pack my old snorkel gear?" Mike nodded. "Yeah, it's in the bottom of the beach bag." "Why?" Sarah's eyes lit up with excitement. "I think I might give it a try. It's been years since I've gone snorkeling, and the water looks perfect." "Are you sure?" Mike asked, a note of concern in his voice. "What about the kids?" Sarah laughed, giving him a playful shove. "They're fine, Mike. The lifeguard's right there, and you'll be watching them. I won't go out far, I promise." After a moment's hesitation, Mike nodded. "All right, but be careful. And don't stay out too long. I might get jealous of all the fish vying for your attention." Sarah rolled her eyes at his terrible joke, but kissed him quickly before heading back to their spot on the beach. She dug through the bag, finally locating her snorkel mask and fins. As she was about to head back to the water, she paused, her earlier unease returning. "Hey, Mike," she called out. "Did you hear anything about sharks in the area?" Mike, who was now building a sandcastle with Ethan, looked up with a puzzled expression. "Sharks? No, why?" Sarah shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Oh, just overheard some people talking earlier. Probably nothing." Mike stood up, brushing sand from his hands. "Sarah, if you're worried, you don't have to go. We can find something else to do." She shook her head, annoyed at herself for letting a random conversation get to her. "No, it's fine. I'm sure it was just gossip. Besides, I'll stay in the shallow area." With a determined nod, Sarah marched back to the water's edge. She put on her fins and mask, adjusting the strap carefully. The snorkel felt strange in her mouth after so many years, but as she waded deeper into the water, muscle memory took over. Sarah took a deep breath and ducked beneath the surface. The underwater world came alive around her, a kaleidoscope of colors and movement. Small fish darted between patches of seagrass, their scales glinting in the filtered sunlight. She marveled at the beauty of it all, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. As she swam parallel to the shore, staying in water no deeper than chest height, Sarah lost track of time. She was so engrossed in watching a pair of striped fish weave through a cluster of rocks that she didn't notice how far she'd drifted from her family. A sudden shadow passed overhead, startling her. Sarah lifted her head above water, expecting to see a cloud crossing the sun. Instead, the sky was clear and blue. A tendril of unease curled in her stomach. "Must have been a bird," she muttered to herself, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Sarah was about to duck back underwater when she heard Mike's voice calling her name. She turned towards the shore, surprised to see how much distance she'd covered. Mike was waving at her, gesturing for her to come back. With a sigh, Sarah began to swim towards the beach. She'd only taken a few strokes when something brushed against her leg. She froze, her heart leaping into her throat. It felt rough like sandpaper. "It's just seaweed," she told herself, her voice shaky even to her own ears. "Or a piece of driftwood, nothing to worry about." But as Sarah resumed swimming, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. The water around her seemed to grow colder, and the cheerful sounds of the beach faded away, replaced by the loud pounding of her own heartbeat. Another shadow moved beneath her, larger this time. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as a dorsal fin broke the surface of the water, just yards away. Time seemed to slow down as her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. Then, in a burst of movement that sent water spraying into the air, a massive shape lunged towards her. Sarah caught a glimpse of cold black eyes and rows of razor-sharp teeth before her world exploded into pain and terror. Her scream was cut short as she was pulled underwater, the taste of salt and copper filling her mouth. In that moment, as the shadow engulfed her, Sarah Thompson realized that her perfect day at the beach had turned into a nightmare from which she might never wake. Sarah broke the surface of the water, gasping for air. Her heart raced as she tried to calm herself, still shaken by the memory of her earlier encounter. She treaded water, scanning the horizon and reminding herself that she was safe in the shallows. "Get a grip, Sarah," she muttered to herself, adjusting her snorkel mask. "It was just a shadow, probably a dolphin or something." Despite her attempts at self-reassurance, Sarah couldn't shake the lingering unease that clung to her like seaweed. She glanced back towards the shore, where Mike was helping Ethan build a sandcastle. Emma splashed nearby in the gentle waves, her laughter carrying across the water. Sarah waved, catching Mike's attention. He returned the gesture with a thumbs up, silently asking if she was okay. She nodded, forcing a smile. No need to worry them over what was likely just her overactive imagination. Taking a deep breath, Sarah submerged again, determined to enjoy the rest of her snorkeling adventure. The underwater world welcomed her back, a kaleidoscope of blues and greens shimmering in the filtered sunlight. Schools of small silvery fish darted around her, their scales flashing like tiny mirrors. As she swam parallel to the shore, staying in chest-deep water, Sarah's tension began to ease. The rhythmic sound of her breathing through the snorkel and the gentle resistance of the water against her body had a calming effect. She focused on the vibrant marine life around her, marveling at the intricate patterns of coral and the graceful swaying of sea fans. A flash of movement caught her eye, and Sarah turned her head to see a sea turtle gliding effortlessly through the water a few yards away. Its ancient eyes seemed to regard her with curiosity as it propelled itself forward with languid flaps of its flippers. "Wow," Sarah breathed through her snorkel, careful not to startle the creature. She followed at a respectful distance, captivated by its serene presence. The turtle led her slightly further from shore, towards a small cluster of rocks teeming with marine life. Colorful fish darted in and out of crevices, and Sarah spotted what looked like a small octopus camouflaged against the rocky surface. Lost in wonder, Sarah almost didn't notice the subtle shift in the water around her. A cooler current brushed against her legs, and the small fish that had been so abundant suddenly vanished, as if scattered by an unseen force. The hairs on the back of Sarah's neck stood up. She lifted her head above water, pushing her mask up, onto her forehead. The surface of the ocean seemed calm, but something felt off. "Hello?" she called out, suddenly aware of how alone she was. The other snorkelers she had seen earlier were nowhere in sight, and she realized she had drifted further from her family than she had intended. Sarah began to swim back toward shore, her strokes more urgent now. She tried to rationalize her fear, telling herself that the ocean was vast and unpredictable. It was natural to feel small and vulnerable in its presence. A dark shape moved in her peripheral vision, gone almost as soon as she registered it. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She spun around in the water, searching for whatever had triggered her fight-or-flight response. "It's nothing," she said aloud, her voice shaky. "Just a big fish. Or a seal. Yeah, probably a seal. But deep." Down, Sarah knew she was lying to herself. The primal part of her brain recognized the danger before her conscious mind could process it. This was no seal. She resumed swimming towards the beach, no longer caring about the marine life around her. All she wanted was to feel the sand beneath her feet, to be back with her family, safe on dry land. The shadow returned, more distinct this time. It glided beneath her with fluid grace, its size and shape unmistakable. Sarah's worst fears were confirmed as a large triangular fin broke the surface of the water about 20 yards away. "Shark!" The scream tore from her throat before she could stop it. "Shark, help!" On the shore, Mike's head snapped up at the sound of Sarah's cries. He saw her thrashing in the water and immediately sprang into action. "Emma, Ethan, get out of the water now," he shouted, already running towards the lifeguard stand. "There's a shark!" Panic erupted on the beach. Parents frantically called their children back to shore, and the once peaceful atmosphere dissolved into chaos. In the water, Sarah fought to stay calm. She remembered reading somewhere that panicking would only attract the shark's attention. With trembling arms, she began to backstroke towards the shore, trying to keep her movements smooth and deliberate. The shark circled lazily, its fin slicing through the water like a knife. It seemed to be assessing her, deciding whether she was worth the effort of an attack. Sarah's mind raced. Bull sharks were known to be aggressive and could tolerate shallow water. Why was it so close to shore? Had there been any warning signs she'd missed? The distance to the beach seemed impossibly vast. Sarah could hear shouts from the shore, see people pointing in her direction. A lifeguard was sprinting into the surf, rescue buoy in hand. But would they reach her in time? The shark suddenly disappeared beneath the surface. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She knew that losing sight of the predator was dangerous. Attacks often came from below, swift and unexpected. "Please," she whispered, her voice choked with fear. "Please, just let me make it back." A large, dark shape materialized in the water directly beneath her. Sarah barely had time to take a breath before the ocean itself seemed to explode around her. The bull shark launched itself upwards with incredible speed, its massive jaws open wide. Sarah caught a glimpse of rows of serrated teeth, white and terrible against the grey skin of its snout. She screamed, the sound lost in the crash of water as the shark breached the surface. Time seemed to slow down. Sarah saw every detail with horrifying clarity. The black, lifeless eye rolling back in its socket, the scars that marred its rough skin, the pink of its gums as its jaws snapped shut mere inches from her face. Some miracle, the shark's initial lunge missed her body, but as it crashed back into the water, its tail whipped around, catching Sarah in the side with bone-crushing force. The impact knocked the air from her lungs and sent her tumbling through the water. Disoriented and gasping for breath, Sarah struggled to right herself. The taste of copper filled her mouth. Had she bitten her tongue? Or was it blood from some injury she couldn't yet feel? Through the murky water she saw the shark circling back for another pass. Its body language had changed. There was no more lazy curiosity. Now it moved with the single-minded purpose of a hunter that had chosen its prey. Sarah's survival instincts kicked in. She began to thrash and kick, creating as much commotion as possible. She'd heard that sometimes. This could deter a shark, make it think twice about attacking. "Help!" she screamed again as she broke the surface. "Somebody help me!" The shark charged again, this time from the side. Sarah felt a searing pain as its rough skin grazed her leg, tearing her flesh. The water around her began to turn red with blood. On the beach, Mike watched in horror as the scene unfolded. The lifeguard was still too far away. Without thinking, he plunged into the surf, determined to reach his wife. "Sarah," he shouted, pushing through the waves with all his strength. "I'm coming. Hold on!" But even as he swam, Mike knew he might be too late. The shark was relentless, circling Sarah with increasing speed. Each pass brought it closer, its attacks growing bolder. Sarah was weakening. The pain in her leg was excruciating, and she could feel herself growing lightheaded from blood loss and terror. The shore still seemed so far away. As the bull shark came around for what Sarah knew would be its final devastating attack, a strange calm settled over her. Time seemed to slow once more. She thought of her children on the beach, of the life she and Mike had built together. A profound sadness washed over her, followed by a surge of determination. "No," she said through gritted teeth. "Not like this. Not today." With the last of her strength, Sarah lunged forward, her fingers brushing against something solid, the rocks she had been admiring earlier. She grabbed hold, pulling herself onto the shallow reef, just as the shark made its final charge. The bull shark's powerful body scraped against the coral, tearing its skin. Confused and injured, it thrashed in the shallow water before retreating back into deeper seas. Sarah clung to the rocks, her body shaking with adrenaline and shock. She could hear voices approaching, Mike and the lifeguard finally reaching her. As hands gently lifted her from the water, Sarah's last thought before unconsciousness claimed her was of the ocean's terrible beauty and the fine line between life and death that existed in its depths. The peaceful day at the beach had transformed into a nightmare, one that would haunt Sarah and her family for years to come. But for now, she was alive, saved by a combination of luck, instinct, and the indomitable human will to survive. The world exploded into chaos as the bull shark's massive jaws clamped down on Sarah's leg. Her scream of agony pierced the air, cutting through the ambient sounds of the beach and sending shockwaves of terror through everyone within earshot. "Sarah!" Mike's voice cracked with panic as he watched his wife disappear beneath the churning, blood-stained water. He was already knee-deep in the surf, his paternal instincts warring with his desire to save his wife. "Emma, Ethan, stay on the beach." The children stood frozen in horror, their sandcastle forgotten as they watched their father plunge into the waves. Emma, the older of the two, grabbed her brother's hand and pulled him back towards the lifeguard stand, her young face a mask of fear and determination. Beneath the surface, Sarah's world had narrowed to a pinpoint of pain and survival instinct. The shark's teeth tore through flesh and muscle, sending jolts of agony coursing through her body. She thrashed wildly, her fists pounding against the creature's rough hide as she fought to break free. In that moment, Sarah's training as a nurse kicked in. Through the haze of pain and terror, a detached part of her mind noted the severity of her injury. Femoral artery, she thought. Need to stop the bleeding or I'll die before I even reach the shore. With a surge of desperate strength, Sarah jammed her thumbs into the shark's eyes. The bull shark recoiled, its grip loosening just enough for Sarah to wrench her mangled leg free. She kicked hard with her good leg, propelling herself towards the surface. As her head broke through the waves, Sarah gulped in air, her lungs burning. "Help!" she screamed, her voice raw and primal. "Shark, help me!" On the beach, pandemonium reigned. Tourists ran in all directions, parents scooping up children and fleeing the water's edge. The lifeguard, a young man named Jake, sprinted towards his rescue boat, his training kicking in even as his heart raced with fear. "Everyone out of the water," Jake shouted, his voice amplified by his megaphone. "Shark attack in progress. Clear the beach." Mike swam with powerful strokes, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd last seen Sarah. The taste of salt and fear was bitter in his mouth. "I'm coming, Sarah," he yelled. "Oh, hold on." Sarah heard Mike's voice, distant but growing closer. She tried to call out to him, but another wave crashed over her head, filling her mouth with seawater. As she resurfaced, coughing and sputtering, she saw the shark's fin cutting through the water, circling back for another attack. Time seemed to slow as Sarah treaded water, her injured leg leaving a trail of blood in the azure sea. She could see Mike swimming towards her, his face a mask of determination and terror. The lifeguard's boat was speeding in her direction, its motor roaring over the sound of the waves. But the shark was faster. Sarah felt the water displacement as the massive predator surged towards her from below. In that split second, a strange calm washed over her. If this was how she was going to die, she would face it with courage. The bull shark breached the surface in an explosion of spray, its jaws wide and terrible. Sarah caught a glimpse of its cold black eye rolling back in its socket as it prepared to clamp down on her torso. "No!" The scream came from Mike, who was close enough now to see the horror unfolding. Without hesitation, he dove beneath the waves, aiming for the shark's gills. Sarah felt the rush of water as the shark's jaws snapped shut inches from her body. Mike's intervention had disrupted its attack, buying precious seconds. She kicked hard with her good leg, ignoring the searing pain from her injury as she swam towards the approaching rescue boat. Jake, the lifeguard, leaned out over the side of the boat, his arm outstretched. "Grab my hand," he shouted. Sarah's fingers brushed against Jake's, but a wave separated them before she could get a firm grip. She could hear the shark thrashing behind her, locked in a deadly dance with Mike. "Mike!" Sarah screamed, torn between swimming to safety and trying to help her husband. "Leave it, swim to the boat." But Mike was beyond hearing. He pummeled the shark's sensitive nose and gills, drawing on strength he didn't know he possessed. The shark, confused by this unexpected resistance, began to retreat. Jake maneuvered the boat closer, reaching out once more. This time, Sarah managed to grasp his hand. With a mighty heave, the lifeguard pulled her from the blood-tinged water and into the relative safety of the boat. "Mike!" Sarah gasped, her voice weak from pain and exertion. "Get Mike!" Jake didn't need to be told twice. He gunned the motor, steering towards where Mike was still grappling with the retreating shark. "Sir," he shouted, "swim to the boat, now." Mike finally disengaged from the shark, his arms and chest covered in cuts from the creature's rough skin. He swam with the last of his strength towards the rescue boat, every stroke an act of defiance against exhaustion and fear. As Jake helped Mike aboard, Sarah crawled towards her husband, leaving a trail of blood on the boat's deck. "Mike," she sobbed, clutching at him with trembling hands. "You're alive, you're okay." Mike gathered Sarah in his arms, mindful of her grievous leg wound. "I thought I'd lost you," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion. Their moment of reunion was short-lived. Jake's urgent voice cut through their relief. "We need to get her to shore now. She's losing a lot of blood." As the boat sped towards the beach, Sarah's adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by waves of searing pain and encroaching shock. She could feel herself growing lightheaded, the edges of her vision starting to darken. "Stay with me, Sarah," Mike pleaded, applying pressure to her leg wound. "Look at me. Focus on my voice." Sarah tried to comply, but her thoughts were becoming fuzzy. She could hear the panicked shouts from the shore growing louder as they approached. "Mommy!" Emma's terrified cry cut through the chaos as the boat reached the shallows. "Daddy! Stay back!" Jake ordered as he and Mike lifted Sarah from the boat. "We need space to work." A crowd had gathered on the beach, a mix of horrified onlookers and medical personnel who had been summoned. Paramedics rushed forward with a stretcher, their faces grim as they assessed Sarah's injuries. Significant blood loss from the right leg, one paramedic reported as they transferred Sarah to the stretcher. "Possible arterial damage. We need to move fast." As they rushed Sarah up the beach towards the waiting ambulance, Mike jogged alongside, still holding her hand. Emma and Ethan, corralled by a kind stranger, watched with tear-streaked faces. "Sir, you need medical attention too," a paramedic said to Mike, eyeing his cuts and abrasions. Mike shook his head vehemently. "I'm not leaving her." In the ambulance, the paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize Sarah. IVs were inserted, wounds were packed, and vital signs were monitored with intense focus. Mike sat at Sarah's head, stroking her hair and murmuring words of encouragement. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in her leg a constant throbbing presence. Through the haze, she heard snippets of urgent conversation. Blood. Pressure's dropping. Need more gauze here. Possible signs of hypovolemic shock. As the ambulance wailed through the streets of Amity Island, Sarah forced her eyes open, meeting Mike's worried gaze. "The kids," she whispered. "They're safe," Mike assured her, his voice cracking. "They're with the police. They'll meet us at the hospital." Sarah managed a weak nod before another wave of pain washed over her. As darkness began to creep in at the edges of her vision, her last conscious thought was of the shark's cold, black eyes staring into her soul, a primal reminder of nature's brutal indifference. The ambulance doors burst open as they arrived at the hospital, and Sarah was quickly whisked away into the emergency room, leaving Mike standing alone, covered in blood and seawater, as the full weight of what had just occurred began to settle upon him. The attack had lasted mere minutes, but its repercussions would echo through their lives for years to come. As Mike sank into a waiting room chair, his body finally succumbing to exhaustion and delayed shock, he realized that their perfect family vacation had turned into a nightmare from which they might never fully awake. The beach erupted into chaos as Sarah's screams pierced the air. Mike, still knee-deep in the surf, felt his heart stop as he watched his wife disappear beneath the churning, blood-tinged water. "Sarah!" he bellowed, his voice cracking with panic. Without hesitation, he plunged deeper into the waves, every instinct screaming at him to reach her. On the shore, Emma and Ethan stood frozen, their sandcastle forgotten. Emma, only 10 but suddenly feeling much older, grabbed her younger brother's hand. "Come on," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "We need to get help." As the children ran towards the lifeguard stand, the beach exploded into frenzied activity. Parents snatched up their children, beachgoers scrambled to gather their belongings, and cries of "shark" rippled through the crowd like a terrible wave. Jake, the young lifeguard on duty, was already sprinting towards his rescue boat. His training kicked in, overriding the fear that threatened to paralyze him. "Everyone out of the water," he shouted through his megaphone. "Shark attack in progress. Clear the beach immediately." In the water, Mike swam with powerful strokes, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd last seen Sarah. The taste of salt and fear was bitter in his mouth. He could see the shark's fins slicing through the water, circling back towards his wife. "Hold. On, Sarah," he yelled. "I'm coming." Sarah broke the surface again, gasping for air. Her leg was a blaze of agony, blood streaming from the deep gashes left by the shark's initial attack. She could hear Mike's voice, see him swimming towards her, but the shark was closer. Time seemed to slow as Sarah treaded water, fighting to stay conscious. She could see the determination on Mike's face, hear the roar of the approaching rescue boat's motor. But the shark was faster, its massive body already turning for another pass. As the bull shark surged towards her, Sarah made a split-second decision. Drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed, she dove beneath the surface, aiming for the shark's sensitive gills. The water exploded around them as Sarah and the shark collided. She raked her nails across its rough skin, searching desperately for its eyes or gills. The shark thrashed violently, its powerful tail sending shockwaves through the water. Mike reached them just as Sarah resurfaced, coughing and sputtering. "Mike!" she gasped. "The boat! Get to the boat!" He wrapped an arm around her waist, kicking hard to keep them both afloat. The shark circled below, momentarily confused by the commotion, but far from deterred. Jake maneuvered the rescue boat alongside them, his face a mask of controlled panic. "Grab on!" he shouted, extending a rescue buoy. Mike pushed Sarah towards the buoy. "Take her first," he yelled to Jake. As Jake began to pull Sarah aboard, the shark attacked again. Its massive jaws clamped down on the rescue boy, mere inches. From Sarah's already injured leg, the force of the bite snapped the buoy's line, sending Sarah crashing back into the water. "No!" Mike screamed. Without thinking, he dove beneath the surface, aiming for the shark's eyes. Underwater, the scene was chaos. Blood clouded the water, making it difficult to see. Mike could make out the shark's massive shape, feel the rush of water as it thrashed. He pummeled it with his fists, years of frustration and fear channeled into each blow. On the boat, Jake made a split-second decision. He grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit and fired it into the water near the shark. The flash and bang disoriented the predator, giving Mike the chance he needed to grab Sarah and swim towards the boat. "Come on!" Jake shouted, reaching out to them. With a titanic effort, he hauled first Sarah, then Mike aboard. Sarah collapsed on the deck, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The full extent of her injuries became apparent in the harsh sunlight. Deep gashes ran the length of her right leg, and smaller cuts and bruises covered her body. Mike knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he tried to apply pressure to the worst of the wounds. "Stay with me, Sarah," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Jake gunned the motor, speeding back towards shore. He could see the flashing lights of ambulances arriving on the beach, summoned by frantic 911 calls from witnesses. As they neared the shore, Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "The kids," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. "Are they safe?" Mike nodded, tears streaming down his face. "They're on the beach. They're safe. Emma got help. Our brave girl." A weak smile flickered across Sarah's pale face before her eyes closed again. The boat hit the shallows with a jolt. Paramedics were already wading into the surf, a stretcher held high above the waves. With practiced efficiency, they transferred Sarah from the boat to the stretcher. Significant blood loss, one paramedic reported as they hurried up the beach. "Possible arterial damage to the right leg. We need to move fast." Mike jogged alongside the stretcher, holding Sarah's hand. He was vaguely aware of the crowd that had gathered, of the police trying to maintain order, of the news cameras already arriving on the scene. None of it mattered. His entire world had narrowed to the pale, battered form of his wife on the stretcher. As they reached the ambulance, a police officer intercepted Mike. "Sir, we need to ask you some questions about the incident." Mike shook his head vehemently. "My wife needs me. I'm not leaving her." The officer's face softened with understanding. "Of course, we'll talk later. Go with her." In the ambulance, the paramedics worked feverishly to stabilize Sarah. IVs were inserted, wounds were packed, and vital signs were monitored with intense focus. Mike sat at Sarah's head, stroking her hair and murmuring words of encouragement. "You're so strong, Sarah," he whispered. "You fought off a shark. You can fight through this. Just stay with me." The ambulance sped through the streets of Amity Island, its siren wailing. Mike could hear snippets of urgent conversation between the paramedics. Blood. Pressure's dropping. Need more gauze here. Possible signs of hypovolemic shock. Each word sent a fresh wave of fear through Mike. He held Sarah's hand tighter, as if he could anchor her to this world through sheer force of will. As they neared the hospital, Sarah's eyes fluttered open once more. "Mike," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm here, love," he replied, leaning close. "I'm right here." Sarah's grip on his hand tightened fractionally. "If I don't, tell the kids." "No," Mike cut her off, his voice fierce. "You're going to tell them yourself. You're going to be fine. We're almost at the hospital." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips before her eyes closed again, her hand going limp in Mike's grasp. "Sarah?" Mike's voice rose in panic. "Sarah!" The ambulance doors burst open as they arrived at the emergency room. A team of doctors and nurses swarmed the vehicle, whisking Sarah away on a gurney. Mike tried to follow, but a nurse gently held him back. "Sir, you need to let them work," she said, her voice kind but firm. "We'll update you as soon as we can. For now, let's get you looked at too." For the first time, Mike became aware of his own injuries, cuts and bruises from his battle with the shark, his skin raw from salt water and exertion. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in his heart as he watched Sarah disappear through the emergency room doors. As a different nurse led him to an examination room, Mike's phone buzzed. It was a text from the police officer, who had been watching Emma and Ethan. "Children safe, en route to hospital, ETA 10 minutes. Mike sank onto the examination table, the events of the past hour crashing over him like a tidal wave. The perfect family vacation, the idyllic day at the beach, Sarah's excited face as she set out to go snorkeling. It all seemed like a distant dream now, shattered by the nightmare of the shark attack. As the nurse began to clean his wounds, Mike closed his eyes, trying to summon the strength he knew he would need for what lay ahead. Sarah was fighting for her life, and their children were on their way, frightened and confused. He had to be strong for all of them, but in the sterile quiet of the examination room, with the rhythmic beeping of hospital machinery in the background, Mike allowed himself one moment of weakness. A single choked sob escaped his lips as the full weight of their ordeal settled upon him. The nightmare was far from over, but for now they were alive, they were together, and in that moment it had to be enough. The emergency room doors burst open as the paramedics rushed Sarah's gurney through, their voices urgent and focused. "Female, 35, shark attack victim, severe lacerations to the right leg, possible arterial damage, BP 80 over 50 and dropping. She's lost a lot of blood." Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the attending trauma surgeon, was already moving towards them, her face a mask of concentration. "Get her into Trauma 1. I want 2 large-bore IVs, type and cross for 6 units, and get ortho down here stat." As the medical team swarmed around Sarah, Mike tried to follow, his heart pounding in his chest. A nurse gently but firmly held him back. "Sir, you need to let them work. We'll update you as soon as we can." Mike watched helplessly as Sarah disappeared behind a set of swinging doors, the last glimpse of her pale face searing itself into his memory. He slumped against the wall, suddenly aware of his own exhaustion and injuries. "Mr. Thompson," a different nurse approached him, her voice kind but professional. "We need to take a look at you too. You've got some nasty cuts that need attention." Mike shook his head, his eyes still fixed on the doors Sarah had gone through. "I'm fine. I need to be here when there's news about my wife." The nurse's expression softened. "I understand, but you won't be any help to your wife if you collapse from your own injuries. Let's get you cleaned up, and I promise to bring you any updates immediately." Reluctantly, Mike allowed himself to be led to a nearby examination room. As the nurse began cleaning his wounds, the full weight of what had happened started to settle on him. The perfect day at the beach, Sarah's excited smile as she went snorkeling, the children building sandcastles. It all seemed like a distant dream now, shattered by the nightmare of the shark attack. "Your children," the nurse said gently, breaking into his thoughts. "Are they being looked after?" Mike's eyes widened in sudden panic. "Emma and Ethan. They were on the beach. I need to—" "It's okay," the nurse reassured him quickly. "The police called while you were in the ambulance. Your children are safe and on their way here. They should arrive any minute." As if on cue, Mike heard a commotion in the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy!" Emma's voice, high with fear and anxiety, cut through the hospital noise. Mike was off the examination table in an instant, ignoring the nurse's protests. He burst into the hallway, just as Emma and Ethan rounded the corner, accompanied by a police officer. "Dad!" Ethan cried, breaking free from the officer's gentle grip and running full tilt into Mike's arms. Mike scooped up his son, reaching out with his other arm to pull Emma close. For a long moment, they stood there in a tight embrace. The children's sobs muffled against Mike's chest. "It's okay," Mike murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe now, I've got you." Emma pulled back first, her young face streaked with tears but set in a determined expression that reminded Mike painfully of Sarah. "Dad, where's Mum? Is she okay?" Mike took a deep breath, kneeling down to be at eye level with both children. "Mum is very hurt, but the doctors are doing everything they can to help her. She's so strong, kids. She fought off a shark. If anyone can get through this, it's your mum." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "But what if she doesn't? What if the shark—" "No," Mike said firmly, pulling Ethan close again. "We can't think like that. We have to be strong for Mum, okay? She needs all our love and strength right now." As Mike comforted his children, Dr. Rodriguez emerged from the trauma room, her scrubs spattered with blood. Mike's heart leapt into his throat as he stood to meet her, keeping a protective arm around Emma and Ethan. "Mr. Thompson," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice calm but serious. "Your wife is stable for now, but her condition is critical. The shark's teeth caused significant damage to the muscles and blood vessels in her right leg. We're prepping her for emergency surgery to repair the arterial damage and clean the wounds." Mike nodded, trying to process the information. "But she'll be okay, right? Once you do the surgery?" Dr. Rodriguez's expression remained grave. "Mr. Thompson, I want to be honest with you. The injuries are severe. We're doing everything we can, but there's a risk we might not be able to save her leg. And even if we do, she's lost a lot of blood. The next 24 hours will be critical." The words hit Mike like a physical blow. He staggered slightly, and Emma, showing a maturity beyond her years, wrapped an arm around his waist to steady him. "What? What can we do?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Right now, the best thing you can do is be here for her," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "The surgery will take several hours. Try to rest if you can. Eat something. Your wife is going to need you at full strength when she wakes up." As Dr. Rodriguez turned to leave, Ethan's small voice piped up. "Doctor, can you tell our mum we love her? Before you do the surgery." The doctor's stern expression softened. She knelt down to Ethan's level, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I absolutely will, young man. And I promise you we're going to do everything we can to help your mom." As Dr. Rodriguez disappeared back into the trauma room, a social worker approached the family. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Lisa from Child Life Services. I know this is a difficult time, but I'm here to help with anything you or your children might need." Mike nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how overwhelmed he felt. "Thank you. I don't even know where to start. The kids need food, probably a change of clothes, and I should call Sarah's parents, but I don't want to leave in case there's news." Lisa smiled reassuringly. "That's what I'm here for. Let's get you all settled in the family waiting room, and we'll take things one step at a time." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity and tense waiting. Mike made the difficult call to Sarah's parents, his voice breaking as he explained what had happened. Emma and Ethan, exhausted by the day's events, finally fell into a fitful sleep on the waiting room couch. As the clock ticked past midnight, Mike found himself standing at the window, staring out at the dark parking lot below. The events of the day played on repeat in his mind. Sarah's excited smile as she went snorkeling, the terrifying moment when he realized she was in danger, the frantic swim to reach her, the shark's cold, lifeless eyes. "Mr. Thompson?" Mike turned to see Dr. Rodriguez standing in the doorway, still in her surgical scrubs. He held his breath, searching her face for any clue about Sarah's condition. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Rodriguez said, and Mike felt his knees go weak with relief. "We were able to repair the arterial damage and save her leg. However," she continued, her tone cautioning against too much optimism, "she's not out of the woods yet. The next 48 hours will be crucial. We'll be monitoring her closely for signs of infection or complications." Mike nodded, trying to process the information. "Can I see her?" "She's in recovery now. Once we move her to the ICU, you can sit with her. It'll probably be another hour or so." As Dr. Rodriguez turned to leave, Mike called out, "Doctor, thank you for everything." She gave him a tired smile. "Your wife is a fighter, Mr. Thompson. Not many people could survive an attack like that. She's got a long road ahead, but with your support, I believe she has a good chance at recovery." After the doctor left, Mike gently woke Emma and Ethan, sharing the news about their mother. The children's relief was palpable, but Mike could see the fear and uncertainty still lingering in their eyes. "Can we see her?" Emma asked, her voice small and worried. Mike pulled her close. "Not just yet, sweetheart. The doctors need to get her settled first, but soon, I promise. For now, let's try to get some more rest. Mom's going to need us to be strong for her." As the children drifted back to sleep, Mike found himself unable to relax. His mind raced with thoughts of the challenges that lay ahead: Sarah's recovery, the inevitable medical bills, the psychological impact on all of them. The perfect family vacation had turned into a nightmare, one that would have lasting repercussions. But as he watched his children sleep, their faces finally peaceful after hours of fear and worry, Mike felt a surge of determination. They had survived the unthinkable. Sarah had fought off a shark and lived to tell the tale. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The soft beeping of his phone broke into Mike's thoughts. It was a text from Sarah's mother. "On our way. Should be there by morning. Praying for all of you." Mike closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of vulnerability. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they weren't alone. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the hospital windows, Mike Thompson made a silent promise to his family. They would get through this one day at a time with love, strength, and the unbreakable bonds that had seen them through the darkest day of their lives. The gentle beeping of medical equipment filled the ICU room as Sarah Thompson lay motionless, a maze of tubes and wires connecting her to various machines. Mike sat beside her bed, his hand gently holding hers, his eyes never leaving her pale face. The rhythmic rise and fall of her chest, aided by a ventilator, was the only visible sign of life. A soft knock at the door broke the monotony. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered, her face etched with the fatigue of a long night's work. "Mr. Thompson," she said softly, "how are you holding up?" Mike managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Doctor. How's Sarah doing?" Dr. Rodriguez checked the monitors and Sarah's chart before responding. "She's stable, which is good news. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. We're watching closely for any signs of infection or complications." As they spoke, Sarah's eyelids fluttered and a small moan escaped her lips. Mike leaned forward eagerly, but Dr. Rodriguez gently held him back. "It's normal for patients to show some responsiveness, but she's still heavily sedated," the doctor explained. "Try talking to her. Familiar voices can be comforting, even in this state." Mike nodded, leaning close to Sarah's ear. "Hey, love," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're doing great. The kids and I are here. We love you so much." As if in response, Sarah's fingers twitched in Mike's hand. Dr. Rodriguez made a note in the chart, a small smile playing on her lips. "That's a good sign, Mr. Thompson. Keep talking to her. I'll be back to check on her in a bit." After the doctor left, Mike continued his quiet monologue, recounting happy memories and reassuring Sarah of their love. He was so focused on his wife that he barely noticed the passage of time until another knock at the door startled him. Lisa, the social worker from Child Life Services, poked her head in. "Mr. Thompson, your children are asking to see their mother. Do you think you're ready for that?" Mike hesitated, glancing at Sarah's battered form. The idea of Emma and Ethan seeing their mother in this state made his heart ache. But he knew they needed the reassurance of seeing her alive. "Yes," he said finally. "I think it's time, but can you prepare them first? Explain what they'll see?" Lisa nodded understandingly. "Of course. I'll bring them in shortly." True to her word, Lisa returned about 15 minutes later with Emma and Ethan in tow. The children's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Emma, ever the protective older sister, held Ethan's hand tightly. "Hey kids," Mike said softly, opening his arms to them. They rushed into his embrace, their small bodies trembling slightly. "Is Mom okay?" Ethan asked, his voice muffled against Mike's chest. Mike took a deep breath. "She's very hurt, but she's fighting hard. The doctors are doing everything they can to help her." Emma, always the more analytical of the two, studied the various machines surrounding Sarah's bed. "What are all these things for, Dad?" "They're helping Mum breathe and keeping track of her heart and other important things," Mike explained, trying to keep his voice calm and reassuring. "It looks scary, but it's all there to help her get better." Ethan approached the bed cautiously, his small hand reaching out to touch Sarah's arm. "Can she hear us?" Mike nodded, remembering Dr. Rodriguez's words. "I think she can. Why don't you talk to her? Tell her about your day." Encouraged, the children began to chat softly to their mother, sharing stories about the kind nurse who had brought them ice cream and the therapy dog they'd met in the waiting room. Mike watched, his heart swelling with love and pride at their resilience. As the kids talked, a commotion in the hallway caught Mike's attention. Through the glass wall of the ICU room, he could see several men in uniforms talking animatedly with Dr. Rodriguez. One of them, a weathered-looking man in a park ranger uniform, seemed particularly agitated. Curious and slightly concerned, Mike stepped out into the hallway, gesturing for Lisa to keep an eye on the children. "I need to know exactly where the attack took place," the ranger was saying, his voice gruff with urgency. "If that shark is still in the area, we need to take action before someone else gets hurt." Dr. Rodriguez noticed Mike and waved him over. "Mr. Thompson, this is Ranger John Hawkins from the Marine Patrol. He has some questions about the incident." Mike shook the ranger's hand, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of him wanted to help prevent any further attacks, but another part just wanted to focus on Sarah's recovery. "Mr. Thompson," Ranger Hawkins began, his tone softening slightly, "I know this is a difficult time for you and your family, but any information you can give us about the attack could be crucial in preventing another tragedy." Mike nodded, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "Of course. What do you need to know?" For the next several minutes, Mike recounted the events of that terrible day, where Sarah had been snorkeling, how far out she was, and what he had seen of the shark. As he spoke, he could see the ranger's face growing more concerned. "A bull shark, you say?" Hawkins muttered, jotting notes in a small pad. "This close to shore? That's not good." One of the other officials, a man in a suit who had introduced himself as from the mayor's office, cleared his throat nervously. "Now let's not jump to conclusions. We don't want to cause a panic." Ranger Hawkins shot the man a sharp look. "With all due respect, sir, we have a responsibility to public safety. If there's a large bull shark hunting in our waters, people need to know." As the two men argued, Mike's attention was drawn back to the ICU room. Emma was waving frantically, her face pale with fear. "Dad," she called out, "something's wrong with—" "Mom?" Mike rushed back into the room, his heart pounding. Sarah's body was jerking slightly, her face contorted in pain. The monitors around her bed were beeping urgently. Dr. Rodriguez was right behind him, quickly assessing the situation. "She's having a seizure," the doctor said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "It could be a reaction to the medication, or a sign of something more serious. I need everyone out of the room now." As Lisa ushered the frightened children out, more medical staff rushed in. Mike found himself pushed into the hallway, watching helplessly through the glass as the medical team worked frantically around Sarah's bed. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Mike was vaguely aware of Ranger Hawkins placing a comforting hand on his shoulder, of Emma and Ethan crying softly nearby, but his entire focus was on the scene unfolding in Sarah's room. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the frantic activity in the room began to slow. Dr. Rodriguez emerged, her face grave but composed. "Mr. Thompson," she began, and Mike felt his knees go weak with fear. "We've stabilized Sarah for now. The seizure was likely caused by a small blood clot, a potential complication we were watching for. We're adjusting her medication and will be monitoring her even more closely." Mike nodded numbly, trying to process the information. "But she's still with us?" Dr. Rodriguez's expression softened. "Yes, she is. Your wife is incredibly strong, Mr. Thompson. She's fighting hard." As the doctor continued to explain Sarah's condition and the next steps in her treatment, Mike felt a tugging at his sleeve. He looked down to see Ethan, his young face streaked with tears but set in a determined expression. "Dad," Ethan said, his voice small but steady, "is the shark that hurt Mom still out there?" The innocent question hit Mike like a punch to the gut. In the chaos of Sarah's medical crisis, he had almost forgotten about the conversation with Ranger Hawkins. He knelt down to Ethan's level, aware that Emma was listening intently as well. "The truth is, we don't know, buddy," Mike said gently, "but there are people working very hard to make sure everyone stays safe." Ranger Hawkins, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "That's right, young man," he said, his gruff voice softening as he addressed Ethan. "My team and I are going to do everything we can to protect people and understand why this happened." As the ranger spoke, Mike saw a flicker of something. Determination, perhaps, or a newfound sense of purpose. Curiosity in Emma's eyes. She straightened up, wiping away her tears. "Dad," she said, her voice stronger than he'd heard it since the attack, "I want to help. Maybe we could talk to your students about shark safety, so no one else gets hurt like Mom did." Mike felt a surge of pride mixed with a deep ache. His children were showing such courage in the face of this nightmare. He pulled both of them into a tight hug, feeling their small bodies trembling against him. "That's a wonderful idea, Emma," he said softly. "When Mum's a little better, we'll talk about how we can help." As he held his children, Mike's gaze drifted back to Sarah's room. She lay there, still and pale, fighting a battle none of them could fully comprehend. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet imagine. But in that moment, surrounded by his children's love and Sarah's indomitable spirit, Mike felt a flicker of hope. They had survived the unthinkable. Whatever came next, they would face it together, one day at a time. The steady beep of medical equipment filled the hospital room as Sarah Thompson lay motionless, her body a patchwork of bandages and tubes. Mike sat beside her, his hand gently clasping hers, his eyes heavy with exhaustion and worry. It had been 3 days since the shark attack, and Sarah had yet to regain consciousness. A soft knock at the door roused Mike from his vigil. Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez entered, her face etched with the fatigue of long shifts but her eyes alert and focused. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice low and professional. "How are you holding up?" Mike managed a weak smile. "I'm fine, Doctor. Any changes?" Dr. Rodriguez checked Sarah's vitals and examined her charts before responding. "Her condition is stable, which is good news. The infection in her leg seems to be responding to the antibiotics. However, we are still concerned about the extent of nerve damage." As if on cue, Sarah's fingers twitched in Mike's hand. His heart leapt, and he leaned forward eagerly. "Sarah, can you hear me, love?" "Doctor." Rodriguez placed a gentle hand on Mike's shoulder. "It's a good sign, but try not to get too excited. Involuntary movements are common at this stage. Keep talking to her, though. Familiar voices can be very beneficial." Mike nodded, swallowing, the lump in his throat. He turned back to Sarah, his voice soft but steady. "Hey, sweetheart, the kids are doing okay. They miss you so much. Emma's been helping with Ethan, and they're both being so brave." As Mike spoke, Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Dr. Rodriguez moved closer, her practiced eyes scanning for any signs of increased awareness. "Sarah," the doctor called, her voice clear and commanding, "if you can hear me, try to squeeze your husband's hand." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so faintly Mike thought he might have imagined it, Sarah's fingers tightened around his. "That's it, Sarah," Dr. Rodriguez encouraged. "You're doing great. Can you try to open your eyes for us?" Slowly, painfully, Sarah's eyes cracked open. They were unfocused at first, darting around the room in confusion before finally settling on Mike's face. Mike." Her voice was barely a whisper, raspy from disuse and the lingering effects of intubation. Tears sprang to Mike's eyes. "I'm here, love. You're safe. You're in the hospital." Sarah's brow furrowed as she struggled to piece together her fragmented memories. The shark? "You fought it off," Mike said, his voice filled with a mixture of pride and lingering fear. "You were so brave, Sarah." Dr. Rodriguez stepped in, her manner gentle but efficient as she began to assess Sarah's condition. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Dr. Rodriguez. You're in Amity Island General Hospital. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Can you tell me if you're in any pain?" Sarah's face contorted slightly as the fog of unconsciousness continued to lift. My leg. It hurts, and I feel so tired." "That's to be expected," Dr. Rodriguez assured her. "You've been through a tremendous ordeal. We'll adjust your pain medication to make you more comfortable." As the doctor continued her examination, asking Sarah to wiggle her toes and testing her responses, Mike stepped out into the hallway to call the children. Emma answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Dad? Is everything okay?" "Is it Mum?" Mike's voice broke as he delivered the news. "She's awake, Emma. Mum's awake and talking." He could hear Emma's sharp intake of breath, followed by a muffled sob. In the background, Ethan's voice piped up, asking what was happening. "Can we come see her?" Emma asked, hope and fear mingling in her voice. Mike glanced back into the room where Dr. Rodriguez was still examining Sarah. "Not just yet, sweetheart. The doctor's with her now. But soon, I promise. Why don't you and Ethan start getting ready?" I'll call Grandma and Grandpa to bring you over in a little while." After ending the call, Mike returned to Sarah's bedside. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were clearer now, focused on him with a mixture of love and lingering fear. "The kids?" she asked, her voice still weak, but gaining strength. "They're fine," Mike assured her. "They'll be here soon. Your parents have been taking care of them." Sarah nodded, then winced as the movement caused a spike of pain. "Mike," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I can't feel my toes. On my right foot. Is that normal?" Mike exchanged a glance with Dr. Rodriguez, who stepped forward to address Sarah's concern. "Mrs. Thompson," the doctor began, her tone gentle but direct, "the shark attack caused significant damage to your right leg. We've managed to save the limb, but there is extensive nerve damage. It's too early to say for certain, but you may experience some permanent loss of sensation or mobility." Sarah's eyes widened, fear and understanding dawning in them. Will I be able to walk again?" Dr. Rodriguez's expression was one of cautious optimism. "With time and intensive physical therapy, we're hopeful that you'll regain a good deal of function. But I want to be honest with you. It's going to be a long and challenging recovery process." Sarah closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Mike squeezed her hand, his heart breaking for her pain. "We'll get through this," he whispered fiercely. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." Sarah nodded, taking a shaky breath. When she opened her eyes again, there was a glimmer of her old determination in them. "Tell me everything," she said to Dr. Rodriguez. "I need to know what I'm facing." For the next half hour, Dr. Rodriguez explained the extent of Sarah's injuries, the treatment she'd undergone, and the long road of recovery ahead. Sarah listened intently, asking questions when she could, her nurse's training helping her understand the medical jargon. As the doctor finished her explanation, a commotion in the hallway caught their attention. Emma's voice, raised in frustration, carried through the door. "But we want to see her now. Dad said she's awake." Mike moved to the door, opening it to find Emma and Ethan still in their pajamas, with Sarah's parents trying to calm them. "Kids," Mike said, his voice stern but understanding, "I know you're excited, but we need to be calm and quiet for Mum. She's still very tired and sore." Emma's lower lip trembled. "But Dad, you promised." Sarah's weak voice called from the bed. "Let them in, Mike. I need to see my babies." With a nod from Dr. Rodriguez, Mike ushered the children into the room. They approached the bed cautiously, their eyes wide as they took in the sight of their mother surrounded by medical equipment. "Mom?" Ethan's voice was small and scared. Sarah managed a smile, though it was tinged with pain. "Hey, sweethearts, come here, let me look at you." Emma moved first, carefully climbing onto the edge of the bed and taking Sarah's hand. "We were so scared, Mom," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know, baby," Sarah soothed, her own eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry I scared you. But I'm going to be okay. It's going to take some time, but I'm going to get better." Ethan, still hesitant, looked up at Mike. "Is it okay to hug Mum? I don't want to hurt her." Mike nodded, lifting Ethan gently onto the bed. "Just be very careful, buddy." As the family embraced, mindful of Sarah's injuries, Dr. Rodriguez quietly excused herself. Mike caught her eye as she left, mouthing a silent thank you for giving them this moment. For a while they simply held each other, the reality of their reunion too precious for words. But eventually, Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. "Mom," he asked, his voice muffled against Sarah's hospital gown, "did you really fight a shark?" Despite everything, Sarah let out a soft chuckle. "I guess I did, sweetheart. But I don't remember much of it." Emma, always the more practical of the two, sat up straighter. "Are you going to be able to come home soon? We've been staying with Grandma and Grandpa, but it's not the same without you." Sarah exchanged a glance with Mike before answering. "Not for a little while, honey. I have to stay here so the doctors can help me get better. And even when I do come home, things are going to be different for a while." "Because of your leg?" Ethan asked, his young face scrunched in concern. Sarah nodded, choosing her words carefully. "That's right. My leg was hurt pretty badly, so I'm going to need a lot of help while it heals. I might not be able to do all the things I used to do, at least not right away." Emma's eyes filled with determination. "We'll help you, Mom. I can learn to cook, and I'll help with Ethan's homework." Mike felt a surge of pride at his daughter's maturity. "That's very kind, Emma. We're all going to need to work together as a family to get through this." As they continued to talk, Sarah's responses became slower, her eyelids growing heavy. Dr. Rodriguez, who had returned to check on them, gently suggested that it was time to let Sarah rest. "But we just got here," Ethan protested, clinging tighter. To his mother, Sarah kissed the top of his head. "I know, sweetheart, but I promise I'll be here when you come back. I need to sleep now so I can get stronger." As Mike helped the children off the bed, Sarah caught his hand. "Stay?" she asked, her voice fading with exhaustion. Mike nodded, settling back into the chair beside her bed. "Always," he whispered. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, Mike watched his family leave the room, Sarah's parents guiding the reluctant children. The weight of what lay ahead, the long recovery, the financial strain, the emotional toll, settled heavily on his shoulders. But as he looked at Sarah's face, peaceful, now in sleep, Mike felt a renewed sense of determination. They had survived the unthinkable. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, one day at a time. Sarah gripped the parallel bars tightly, her knuckles white with the effort. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she took a shaky step forward, her injured right leg trembling under even this slight weight. "That's it, Mrs. Thompson," encouraged Megan, her physical therapist. "Just a few more steps. You're doing great." 2 weeks had passed since Sarah had regained consciousness, and the harsh reality of her recovery was setting in. Every movement was a battle, every small victory overshadowed by the mountains still left to climb. Sarah gritted her teeth, forcing her right foot forward another inch. Pain shot up her leg, causing her to gasp and sway dangerously. "I've got you," Mike said quickly, his hands hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. He had barely left her side since the attack, his own work put on hold as he dedicated himself to Sarah's recovery. "I don't need you to catch me," Sarah snapped, frustration bubbling over. "I need to do this myself." Mike stepped back, hurt flashing across his face before he masked it with a neutral expression. "Of course. You're right. I'm sorry." Sarah immediately regretted her outburst, but pride and exhaustion kept her from apologizing. Instead, she focused on taking another step, then another, until she reached the end of the bars. "Excellent work, Sarah," Megan said, helping her into the waiting wheelchair. "You've made real progress today." Sarah nodded tersely, too drained to respond. As Mike wheeled her back to her hospital room, an uncomfortable silence hung between them. Once inside, Mike helped Sarah back into bed, his movements gentle despite the tension. As he adjusted her pillows, Sarah finally spoke. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I shouldn't have snapped at you. It's so hard, Mike. Everything hurts, and I feel so useless." Mike sat on the edge of the bed, taking her hand in his. "You're not useless, Sarah. You're the strongest person I know. What you're doing, the progress you're making, it's incredible." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. "But what if it's not enough? What if I can never go back to nursing? What if I can't be the mom our kids need?" Mike leaned in, pressing his forehead against hers. "Listen to me. You are so much more than your job or your ability to run around after the kids. We love you for who you are, not what you can do for us." A knock at the door interrupted their moment. Dr. Rodriguez entered, a tablet in hand and a serious expression on her face. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she began, "I have the results of Sarah's latest scans. I think it's time we discuss long-term prognosis and treatment options." Sarah straightened up, her nurse's instincts kicking in despite her fear. "Go ahead, doctor. We're listening." Dr. Rodriguez pulled up a chair, her manner compassionate but direct. "The good news is that the risk of infection has significantly decreased. Your body is healing well, all things considered. However," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "the nerve damage in your right leg is extensive. While we expect you to regain some function with continued physical therapy, it's unlikely you'll ever recover full mobility or sensation." The words hung heavy in the air. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the full weight of the diagnosis settle over her. Mike squeezed her hand, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What does that mean, practically speaking?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Rodriguez swiped through some images on her tablet. Best case scenario with intensive therapy and possibly some additional surgeries. Sarah may be able to walk short distances with the aid of a cane or walker. However, for longer distances or prolonged periods, she'll likely need to use a wheelchair. Sarah's mind raced, imagining a future so different from the one she'd envisioned. No more long shifts in the ER, no more impromptu dance parties with the kids in the living room, no more morning jogs along the beach. And worst case, Sarah forced herself to ask, needing to know the full scope of possibilities. Dr. Rodriguez's expression softened. Worst case, the leg doesn't respond as well to therapy as we hope. In that scenario, you might be looking at full-time use of a wheelchair with limited ability to bear weight on the injured leg. Mike's grip on Sarah's hand tightened. But that's not likely, right? I mean, Sarah's young, she's healthy. Every case is different, Dr. Rodriguez said gently. Sarah's overall health is certainly in her favor, but I want to be honest with you both. This is going to be a long, challenging journey. It will require patience, dedication, and a lot of hard work. Sarah nodded, her nurse's training helping her process the information clinically, even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. What's the next step? We'll continue with daily physical therapy, gradually increasing intensity as you're able, Dr. Rodriguez explained. We'll also start you on a course of nerve regeneration therapy. It's a relatively new treatment, but we've seen promising results in cases similar to yours. As the doctor continued outlining the treatment plan, another knock at the door interrupted them. Emma poked her head in, her eyes widening as she took in the serious expressions on the adults' faces. "Oh, sorry," she said quickly. "I can come. Back later." "No, sweetheart, come in," Sarah called, forcing a smile. "Is Ethan with you?" Emma entered, followed by her younger brother. The children approached the bed cautiously, clearly sensing the tension in the room. "Hey, kiddos," Mike said, his voice overly cheerful. "How was school today?" Ethan shrugged, his eyes fixed on the various machines surrounding Sarah's bed. "It was okay. Mrs. Johnson asked how Mom was doing." Emma, more perceptive, looked between her parents and Dr. Rodriguez. "Is everything all right? Did something happen?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Mike before answering. "Dr. Rodriguez was just explaining some things about my recovery. It's going to take a long time for me to get better and, well, some things might be different from now on." "Different how?" Emma pressed, her young face creased with worry. Sarah took a deep breath, deciding that honesty was the best approach. "The shark hurt my leg very badly, sweetie. The doctors aren't sure if I'll be able to walk the same way I used to. I might need to use a wheelchair sometimes or a special cane to help me get around." Ethan's lower lip trembled. "But you're still coming home, right? You're not going to stay in the hospital forever?" "Oh, buddy, no," Mike said quickly, pulling Ethan into a hug. "Mom's definitely coming home. It just might take a little while. Longer, and we might need to make some changes to the house to make it easier for her." Emma, always the problem solver, straightened up. "We can help with that. I can move my room downstairs so Mom doesn't have to climb the stairs, and I'll learn how to cook so I can help out more." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat at her daughter's selflessness. "That's very sweet, Emma, but you don't need to give up your room. We'll figure something out." Dr. Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the family interactions, spoke up. "Your family's support is going to be crucial in your recovery, Sarah. But it's also important that everyone, including the children, takes care of their own mental health during this process. I'd like to recommend a family therapist who specializes in helping families cope with major medical events." Mike nodded gratefully. "I think that's a great idea. We could all use some help processing everything that's happened." As the conversation continued, Sarah found her attention drifting. She watched her family, Mike's steadfast presence, Emma's determined problem-solving, Ethan's innocent concern, and felt a complex mix of emotions wash over her. Love, gratitude, fear, anger, hope, all swirling together in a storm she wasn't sure how to weather. The road ahead would be long and difficult, filled with challenges she couldn't yet imagine. There would be dark days, moments of despair when the mountain seemed too high to climb. But looking at the faces of her loved ones, Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to feel since the attack. Possibility. She might never be the same Sarah Thompson who had eagerly donned a snorkel mask on that fateful day, but perhaps with time and the unwavering support of her family, she could become someone new, someone stronger, more resilient, and just as worthy of the love that surrounded her. As Dr. Rodriguez excused herself and the family settled into a more relaxed conversation, Sarah allowed herself to truly smile for the first time in weeks. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together one day at a time. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the beach as Ranger John Hawkins scanned the horizon, his weathered face etched with concern. 6 weeks had passed since Sarah Thompson's attack, and the beaches of Amity Island remained closed. The incident had sent shockwaves through the community, and tensions were running high. "Anything?" called out his partner, Deputy Maria Suarez, as she approached from their parked jeep. Hawkins shook his head, lowering his binoculars. "Nothing yet, but that doesn't mean it's not out there." The "it" in question was the bull shark responsible for Sarah's attack. Despite extensive searches and increased patrols, the predator had managed to evade capture. "John," Maria said gently, "it's been weeks. The likelihood of that specific shark still being in these waters, I know the odds," Hawkins cut her off, his voice gruff. "But until we're certain, these beaches stay closed." As they stood in silence, the distant sound of arguing voices carried on the breeze. Hawkins sighed, recognizing the source of the commotion. A small group of protesters had gathered near the boardwalk, their signs demanding the reopening of the beaches. "We should go deal with that," Maria suggested, already moving towards the group. Hawkins nodded reluctantly, following her. As they approached, he could make out the angry voices more clearly. "This is ridiculous," a man in a business suit was shouting. "Do you have any idea how much money the town is losing? The summer season is almost over." "My family has run that surf shop for 3 generations, an older woman added, her voice trembling with emotion. "If the beaches don't reopen soon, we'll lose everything." Hawkins held up his hands, trying to calm the crowd. "Folks, I understand your frustration, but public safety has to be our top priority." "Public safety?" scoffed the man in the suit. "One isolated incident, and you shut down. The entire coastline, it's an overreaction." Maria stepped forward, her voice firm but empathetic. "Mr. Vaughn, I know your hotel is suffering, but surely you can understand why we need to be cautious." Before Vaughn could respond, a new voice cut through the crowd. "Maybe we should ask the Thompsons what they think about overreacting." The group parted to reveal Mike Thompson, pushing Sarah in her wheelchair. The sight of Sarah, her right leg still heavily bandaged, sent a hush through the crowd. Hawkins moved to greet them, surprise evident on his face. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, we weren't expecting you down here." Sarah managed a small smile, though her eyes were tight with pain. "Doctor said I should try to get some fresh air. Seems we picked an interesting day for it." Mike's expression was grim as he surveyed the group of protesters. "We couldn't help overhearing. You all want the beaches reopened?" Vaughn, at least having the decency to look somewhat abashed, stepped forward. "Mrs. Thompson, no one is dismissing what happened to you. It was a terrible tragedy, but Amity Island depends on our beaches. People's livelihoods are at stake." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting out to the ocean. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried clearly to the assembled group. "I understand your concerns, better than most, I imagine." She gestured to her injured leg. "This isn't just about me losing the ability to walk. It's about the nightmares that wake me screaming every night. It's about my children being afraid to even take a bath because they're terrified of water." Now, the crowd shifted uncomfortably, many avoiding eye contact. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. "But I also understand that life has to go on. That shark took so much from me, from my family. I don't want it to take the lifeblood of this town, too." Hawkins stepped closer, his brow furrowed with concern. "Mrs. Thompson, are you saying you think we should reopen the beaches?" Sarah shook her head slowly. "Not yet. But I don't think keeping them closed indefinitely is the answer either. There has to be a middle ground." Mike squeezed Sarah's shoulder supportively as she addressed the crowd again. What if we used this as an opportunity to educate people, to make our beaches safer?" The group murmured among themselves, interest piqued. Vaughn, sensing a potential compromise, pressed for details. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Thompson?" Sarah's eyes lit up with a spark of her old determination. "A comprehensive beach safety program, increased lifeguard presence, better warning systems, educational programs for tourists and locals alike. And," she paused, taking a deep breath, "I'd be willing to help design it." Mike looked at her in surprise. "Sarah, are you sure that's a big commitment?" She nodded, a mix of fear and resolve in her eyes. "I can't go back to nursing, at least not in the same capacity. But maybe this is how I can still help people. Use my experience to prevent others from going through what we have." Hawkins stroked his chin thoughtfully. "It's an interesting idea. We'd need to get approval from the town council, of course, and set up clear protocols for when the beaches would need to be closed again." "I think it's brilliant," Maria chimed in. "Who better to design a safety program than someone who's lived through the worst-case scenario?" The crowd's mood had shifted, excitement replacing anger as people began to discuss the possibilities. Vaughn, seeing the way the wind was blowing, quickly voiced his support. The Amity Island Business Association would be happy to contribute. "Funding for such a program," he declared magnanimously. "Perhaps we could even organize a benefit event to kick things off." As the group continued to debate and plan, Mike knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair. "Are you really sure about this?" he asked quietly. "It's going to mean reliving that day over and over." Sarah reached out to cup his cheek, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I relive it every day anyway, Mike. At least this way, maybe some good can come from it." Their moment was interrupted by Emma and Ethan, who came running up the beach, out of breath and excited. "Mom, Dad," Emma called out, "you'll never guess what we found." Ethan, barely containing his enthusiasm, blurted out, "There's a baby sea turtle nest. The ranger lady showed us. They're going to hatch soon." Sarah's face lit up with genuine joy. "Really? That's wonderful, kids. Why don't you show us?" As Mike began to push Sarah's wheelchair towards the nesting site, Hawkins called out, "Mr. Thompson, a word?" Mike hesitated, then nodded to Sarah. "I'll catch up in a minute, love." Once the family was out of earshot, Hawkins lowered his voice. "I appreciate what your wife is trying to do here, but you need to understand there are no guarantees. That shark or others like it, they're still out there." Mike's expression hardened. "Do you think I don't know that? Every time I close my eyes, I see that fin cutting through the water, hear Sarah's screams." He trailed off, taking a deep breath to compose himself. "But Sarah's right. We can't live in fear forever. All we can do is try to make things safer, be better prepared." Hawkins nodded solemnly. "Well said. I'll do everything in my power to support this program of hers, but I need you to promise me something." "What's that?" "Keep an eye on her. A trauma like this, it leaves scars deeper than any shark bite. Make sure she's taking care of her mental health as well as her physical recovery." Mike's gaze drifted to where Sarah sat with the children, her face animated as she listened to the ranger explain about the turtle nest. "I will," he promised. "We're in this together, for better or worse." As Mike rejoined his family, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The ocean, so recently a source of terror, now sparkled peacefully in the fading light. Sarah looked up at Mike as he approached, a tentative smile on her face. "What do you think, Dad? Should we bring the kids back to watch the turtles hatch?" Mike felt a lump form in his throat at the hope in her voice. "I think that sounds perfect," he managed. As the Thompson family huddled together on the beach, watching the sky darken and listening to the gentle lapping of the waves, there was a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, they had taken the first step towards reclaiming their lives from the shadow of tragedy. The road ahead would still be long and challenging. Sarah's recovery, both physical and emotional, was far from complete. The town would need time to heal, as well to find a new balance between caution and the need to move forward. But in that moment, as a cool evening breeze carried the promise of new beginnings, there was hope. Hope that from the depths of their darkest day, something positive could emerge. Hope that by sharing their story and working to make a difference, they could find meaning in their suffering. And as the first stars began to twinkle overhead, Sarah, Thompson closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream of a future where the ocean, once again, could be a source of joy rather than fear. Sarah Thompson stood at the edge of the water, her fingers tightly gripping the handles of her walker. The gentle waves lapped at her feet, cool and inviting. Yet she couldn't shake the tremor of fear that ran through her body. It had been exactly 1 year since the shark attack that had nearly claimed her life and irrevocably changed her future. "You don't have to do this," Mike said softly, standing close by her side. "No one would think less of you if you're not ready." Sarah took a deep breath, the salty air filling her lungs. "I need to do this," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "For me, for the kids, for everyone who's been counting on me." In the year since the attack, Sarah had thrown herself into creating Amity Island's comprehensive beach safety program. Her days were filled with meetings, educational seminars, and physical therapy sessions. The work had given her purpose, a way to channel her trauma into something positive. But this moment, facing the ocean that had almost taken everything from her, was perhaps her greatest challenge yet. Emma and Ethan stood a few feet back, watching their mother with a mixture of worry and pride. Emma, now 11 and wise beyond her years, gave her brother's hand a reassuring squeeze. "You can." "Do it, Mom," Emma called out, her voice carrying over the sound of the waves. Sarah turned to look at her children, managing a small smile. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm trying to be as brave as you two have been." With determination etched on her face, Sarah took a tentative step forward. The sand shifted beneath her feet, making her balance precarious. Mike moved to steady her, but she shook her head. "I need to do this on my own," she insisted. Slowly, painfully, Sarah made her way into the shallows. Each step was a battle against both her damaged leg and the primal fear that threatened to overwhelm her. But with each successful movement, she felt a small spark of triumph ignite within her. As the water reached her knees, Sarah paused, her breath coming in short gasps. Memories of that fateful day flashed through her mind, the initial excitement of exploring the underwater world, the sudden terror as the shark appeared, the searing pain of its attack. She closed her eyes, willing herself to stay present, to focus on the here and now. "Sarah," Mike's concerned voice broke through her thoughts. "Do you want to come back now? You've already accomplished so much." She shook her head, eyes still closed. "Not yet, just give me a moment." As Sarah stood there, the gentle rhythm of the waves washing around her legs, she forced herself to confront her fears head-on. Yes, the ocean had nearly taken her life, but it had also given her a new purpose, a way to help others and perhaps prevent similar tragedies. Slowly, Sarah opened her eyes. The vast expanse of blue stretched out before her, beautiful and terrifying, in equal measure. But for the first time in a year, she felt a glimmer of something she had thought lost forever, a sense of peace. "I'm ready to come back now," she said softly. Mike waded out to her, offering his arm for support. As they made their way back to the beach, Sarah was surprised to see a small crowd had gathered. Ranger Hawkins was there, along with Deputy Suarez, and several members of the town council. Even Mr. Vaughan from the Business Association stood watching, a look of respect on his face. As Sarah's feet touched dry sand, a spontaneous round of applause broke out. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, but also a surge of pride. Ranger Hawkins stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the Amity Island community, we wanted to thank you for everything you've done this past year. Your courage and dedication have made our beaches safer for everyone." Deputy Suarez nodded in agreement. "The educational programs you've implemented have been incredibly effective. We've seen a significant increase in awareness and preparedness among both locals and tourists." Mr. Vaughan, looking somewhat sheepish, added his own thoughts. "I'll admit I was skeptical at first, but you've managed to strike a balance between safety and keeping our town's economy alive. The Swim Smart campaign has actually become a draw for conscientious tourists." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I thank you all, but I couldn't have done any of this without the help of everyone here. It's been a community effort." As the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself surrounded by her family. Ethan hugged her tightly, while Emma beamed with pride. "You did it, Mom," Emma said. "You went in the ocean again, Sarah nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. I did, and you know what? It felt okay, not great, not yet, but okay. Mike wrapped his arm around her shoulders. That's a huge step, love. I'm so proud of you. As they made their way back up the beach, Sarah's gait still uneven but steadier than it had been in months, she found herself reflecting on the journey of the past year. The physical recovery had been grueling. Countless hours of physical therapy, learning to navigate the world with limited mobility in her right leg. There were days when the pain seemed unbearable, when she wanted nothing more than to give up and surrender to despair. But the emotional and psychological recovery had been even more challenging. Nightmares plagued her sleep for months, vivid recreations of the attack that left her waking in cold sweats, screaming. Even simple things like taking a bath or watching the kids play in a pool could trigger panic attacks. The family therapy sessions had been a lifeline, helping all of them process the trauma and its aftermath. Sarah had learned to vocalize her fears and frustrations, while Mike found ways to support her without smothering her independence. Emma and Ethan, too, had benefited, learning to cope with their own anxieties and the changes in their family dynamic. As they reached the boardwalk, Sarah paused, turning to look back at the ocean. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the water. It was beautiful, she realized with a start. For the first time in a year, she could look at the ocean and see its beauty again, not just its danger. What are you thinking? Mike asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Sarah took a moment to find the right words. I'm thinking that I'm not the same person I was a year ago. And that's okay. I'm stronger in ways I never imagined I could. Emma, always perceptive, picked up on the underlying current of her mother's thoughts. But you still miss your old life sometimes, don't you? Sarah nodded, feeling a familiar pang of grief. I do, sweetheart. I miss being a nurse, being able to run and play with you kids without thinking about it. But I'm learning to appreciate what I can do now, not just mourn what I've lost. Ethan, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly spoke up. Mum, do you think you might want to go swimming again someday? The question caught Sarah off guard. Her instinctive reaction was fear, but she forced herself to consider it seriously. I don't know, buddy. Maybe someday. Now just standing in the shallows is a big step. But I've learned never to say never. As they made their way to the parking lot, Sarah noticed a flyer posted on a nearby bulletin board. It was advertising an upcoming beach cleanup event, part of the environmental education initiative she had helped start. Seeing tangible evidence of the positive changes she had been part of brought a warm feeling to her chest. You know, she said thoughtfully, I think I might volunteer for the cleanup next month. Not in the water, of course, but maybe I could help coordinate from the shore. Mike squeezed her hand. That sounds like a great idea, and who knows, maybe by next summer you'll be ready to try a bit of shallow water work. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought, but it was tempered by a growing sense of possibility. One step at a time, she said with a small smile, but yeah, maybe. As they drove home, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, Sarah found herself filled with a cautious optimism. The past year had been the hardest of her life, filled with pain, fear, and seemingly insurmountable challenges. But it had also shown her the depths of her own strength, the unwavering support of her family, and the resilience of her community. She wasn't the same Sarah Thompson who had eagerly donned a snorkel mask a year ago. That woman was gone, transformed by trauma and recovery into someone new, someone who understood the fragility of life and the power of perseverance, someone who had faced her deepest fears and, while not conquering them entirely, had learned to coexist with them. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to push forward, to reclaim pieces of her life from the shadow of that terrible day. It wouldn't be easy, and there would undoubtedly be setbacks along the way, but with her family by her side and the support of her community behind her, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The ocean had nearly taken everything from her, but in surviving, in fighting back, Sarah Thompson had discovered reservoirs of strength she never knew she possessed. And that, she realized, was a gift she would cherish for the rest of her life.